Hey everyone! Today we're diving into the fascinating world of the Cathars, a medieval religious group from southern France in the 12th century, known as Cathari, meaning pure ones in Greek. They were also called Albigensians after the town of Albi, a hub of their belief. So, what made the Cathars stand out? They were a dualist sect, meaning they believed in two fundamental forces, good and evil. Their beliefs were heavily influenced by an ancient Persian religion called Manichaeism, and they also drew inspiration from the Bogomils, a group from Bulgaria who mixed Manichaeism with Christianity. Cathar priests lived very simple lives. They had no possessions, imposed no taxes, and treated men and women as equals. These practices were quite appealing at a time when many were disillusioned with the Catholic Church's wealth and power. The Cathars believed that Satan had deceived some angels, causing them to fall from heaven and be trapped in human bodies. They thought life's purpose was to reject worldly pleasures and, through reincarnation, make one's way back to heaven. In the Cathar community, there was a strict hierarchy. At the top were the Perfecti, who had completely renounced the world and lived as priests and bishops. Then there were the Credentes, believers who still engaged with the world but aimed to achieve renunciation. Lastly, there were the sympathizers, non-believers who supported the Cathar communities. The Cathars had a very critical view of the Catholic Church. They saw the Church's teachings as immoral and believed most of the Bible was inspired by Satan. They were particularly opposed to the hypocrisy they saw in the clergy and the Church's acquisition of wealth and land. In response, the Church condemned the Cathars as heretics, leading to the brutal Albigensian Crusade between 1209 and 1229, which devastated the Cathar communities and much of southern France. Most of what we know about the Cathars comes from the confessions of heretics taken by the Catholic Church during the Inquisition that followed the Crusade. Their belief system can be traced back to Manichaeism, which traveled from the Byzantine Empire and the Middle East to Europe, where it mixed with Christian beliefs. Unlike the Catholic Church, which believed in one God with three aspects, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the Cathars saw God as having both male and female aspects. This belief in a divine feminine principle encouraged gender equality in their communities. They also believed in reincarnation, or metempsychosis, where a soul would be reborn until it fully renounced the world and escaped the cycle of rebirth and death. They viewed the universe as a battleground between two powerful deities, one good and one evil, and the goal of life was to serve the good and return to God. The Cathars practiced vegetarianism, though eating fish was allowed for some. Celibacy was highly encouraged, especially for the Perfecti, as they believed that each new birth trapped another soul in a body. They also placed a high value on manual labor, with everyone working, including the priests. Under certain conditions, they even saw suicide, or the ritual of Endura, as a dignified way to escape the physical world. One striking aspect of the Cathar faith was their rejection of many parts of the Bible, which they believed were authored by the devil. They only accepted certain books, such as Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and a few others. And now let's dive deeper into their beliefs and practices. The Cathars accepted only certain parts of the New Testament, mainly the Gospels, and placed special emphasis on the Gospel according to John. They completely rejected the epistles of Paul and others. Their central religious text was the Book of Two Principles. This text, read aloud by one of the Perfecti and interpreted by another, explained the dualist nature of life and how divine spirits of light became bound in mortal flesh. The story in the Book of Two Principles tells us about the devil's cunning. The devil, barred from heaven, waited outside its gates for 1,000 years, seeking a way in. When he finally slipped through, he convinced a group of divine spirits that serving God brought them nothing. He promised them earthly pleasures, beautiful vineyards, rich fields, lovely companions, and fine wine, if they would follow him and leave heaven. Seduced by his promises, these souls fell through a hole in heaven for 9 days and nights. When God sealed the hole to prevent others from falling, Those who had left found themselves in the devil's realm, void of the promised pleasures. Realizing their mistake, they begged the devil to return to heaven, but he had already trapped them in bodies that made them forget their divine origins. The devil, struggling to animate these bodies with the souls, sought God's help. God, understanding that the fallen souls needed a path to redemption, made a deal. The devil could control the bodies, but the souls within belonged to God. Thus, humans were created, souls trapped in bodies, destined to struggle against earthly temptations to eventually return to God. This belief starkly contrasted with the Church's teachings. The Church taught of a Garden of Eden, where Eve's actions led to humanity's fall, and humanity's redemption came through Jesus Christ, the Son of a single, all-powerful God. The Cathars, however, saw God and the devil as equal, eternal forces, with the devil, known as Rex Mundi, ruling the material world. They rejected the Church's narrative of Jesus' birth, suffering, death, and resurrection, interpreting these events as allegories for the soul's journey. The Cathars saw the cross not as a symbol of salvation, but as a representation of Rex Mundi's worldly power. They believed it should be destroyed, along with other church sacraments like infant baptism and communion. Unlike the Church, the Cathars viewed sex as a natural part of human life, permissible for pleasure, not just procreation. Birth control and abortion were practiced by non-celibate Cathars. They valued women as equals, elevating figures like Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary. Some scholars even suggest that the Cathars' high regard for womanhood influenced the rise of the cult of the Virgin Mary in medieval Europe, which grew increasingly popular and influential. And now let's dive deeper into how the Cathars organized and spread their faith. Cathar communities, which ranged from 60 to 600 members, shared everything and cared for each other like family. Their simple communal lifestyle, especially that of the Perfecti, or the pure ones, was incredibly inspiring. The Perfecti lived blameless lives and were always ready to help others, which played a crucial role in attracting followers. Initially, the Cathar faith appealed primarily to peasants, but it quickly spread to other societal classes. Artisans, writers, poets, merchants, business owners, members of the Catholic clergy, and even nobility found the Cathar beliefs compelling. Notably, Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter, Marie de Champagne, were known sympathizers of the Cathars. The Cathars were easily recognizable by their simple dark robes, hoods, or hats, and the men often had long beards and went barefoot. By the 1140s, Cathar communities were documented in France, and their numbers had grown significantly by 167, prompting the need for organized structure. The Council of Saint Felix of 1167 established Cathar communities into bishoprics, each overseen by a bishop accountable only to his local flock, with no central authority like the Pope in Rome. This council was led by Nikitos, a Bogomil cleric, linking Catharism directly to Bogomilism. To become a Cathar, one simply professed their belief and received the consolamentum, a blessing through the laying on of hands. Becoming one of the Perfecti required renouncing the world and undergoing a period of withdrawal and purification. Both men and women could become Perfecti. Instead of formal church services or masses, Cathars held informal gatherings, often in homes. In southern France, where the Catholic Church had limited influence, Cathars lived openly within their communities. Elsewhere, they had to conceal their beliefs and practice their faith in secret. Some scholars believe this secrecy contributed to the rise of the medieval poetry genre known as courtly love. Courtly love poetry emerged in southern France around the same time as the Cathar movement. These poems celebrated romantic love, portraying noble knights who served and adored beautiful women, often involving quests to rescue damsels in distress. Chrétien de Troyes, a renowned poet of this genre, was patronized by Marie de Champagne. His works introduced famous elements of the Arthurian legend, like Lancelot's affair with Queen Guinevere and the quest for the Holy Grail. Courtly love poetry was a stark departure from earlier medieval literature, emphasizing romantic love over arranged marriages. Women in these stories played central roles, being revered and served by men. Scholars like C.S. Lewis suggest that Catharism might have influenced these themes, with the damsel in distress symbolizing Sophia, the feminine aspect of God, held captive by the Catholic Church, and the brave knight representing the Cathar believer dedicated to rescuing her. And now let's talk about the Albigensian Crusade. By the late 12th century, the Cathars were gaining more followers than ever, despite the Church's attempts to win them back to orthodoxy. The Church tried everything, from sending papal legates to southern France to calling councils, but nothing seemed to work. In 1208, Pope Innocent III sent Pierre de Castelnau, a lawyer monk, to southern France to get Raymond Vai, Count of Toulouse, to help suppress the Cathar heresy. But Raymond, who was a big supporter of the Cathars and even served as their bishop in Toulouse, refused to cooperate. When Castelnau was later found murdered, Pope Innocent III decided enough was enough. He called for a crusade against southern France, promising the northern nobles that they could keep all the rich lands and treasures of the southern regions once the Cathars and their supporters were crushed. Tempted by this promise, the northern nobles eagerly joined the crusade, which kicked off in 1209. Tragically, the majority of Cathars were women and children, and they were the ones who suffered the most in this brutal crusade. Whole towns were burned, and their inhabitants were massacred. One infamous moment was the massacre at Béziers, when the commander of the Church's forces, Arnaud Amaury, was asked how to distinguish between heretics and believers. He reportedly said, "Kill them all, the Lord knows who are his." The result was a horrific slaughter, with church documents claiming that 20,000 people were killed in and around Béziers, and the town itself was burned to the ground. The crusade continued with Simon de Montfort leading the charge after the sack of Carcassonne in 1209. The destruction of southern France went on, enriching the northern barons who participated. By 1229, the official crusade was over, but the persecution of the Cathars did not end. Northern armies continued to attack villages, killing innocent people. One notable stronghold, Montségur, held out until it was finally taken between May 1243 and March 1244. In the aftermath, 200 Perfecti were burned alive on a large pyre, marking the last major defense of the Cathars. Despite the devastation, Catharism was not entirely eradicated. The Albigensian Crusade might have destroyed the tolerant culture of southern France and replaced it with the more rigid vision of the medieval church, but it didn't stamp out Catharism itself. The surviving Cathars continued to practice their faith in secret, as documented in church records of inquisitions well into the 14th century. As an organized religious sect, Catharism was extinguished at Montségur, but as a living faith it persisted. Later heretical movements borrowed from the Cathars, who, in standing up to the medieval church's authority, foreshadowed the Protestant Reformation.